George W. Bush Sr. was the man who was the overlord of what the happened on 9/11. This was definitely something that was an inside job, and he was literally the master of the black operations. Because lest we forget that H.W. Bush, George Bush Sr., he was the head of the CIA after the person that replaced Allen Dulles. I mean, lest we forget that George W. Bush Sr., George H.W. Bush, was there outside the building in Dallas where Lee Harvey Oswald supposedly shot John F. Kennedy. I mean, do you all think that's a coincidence? Now, what you have here is George Bush Sr. standing right outside, right after Lee Harvey Oswald supposedly shot John F. Kennedy, all right? There he is right there, okay? George Bush Sr. used to like wearing these skinny ties and suits. He was rather lanky, has the same hairline as this person, okay? George Bush Sr. was a guy that was an ultimate CIA operative. And if you don't believe me, look, let me show you something else. Did you all ever see George H.W. Bush give a eulogy for one Gerald Ford? And something funny he said in that, and it wasn't really funny, but he chuckled about it. Listen to what this guy says. This was George Bush Sr. eulogizing Gerald Ford, and take a look at how he chuckles in reference to the JFK assassination at this guy's funeral.
Over America. After a deluded gunman assassinated President Kennedy,
did you see that?
Our nation turned to Gerald Ford and a select handful of others. After a deluded gunman assassinated
look
President
at him
Kennedy.
Laugh. Look at him chuckle. I mean, what kind of evil do you have to be to not only bring up the JFK assassination in relation to Gerald Ford, but then chuckle about it, laugh about it? That's why I'm telling you, this fucking guy is the prince of fucking darkness when this guy was alive. This guy was the ultimate black operative. And by the way, George W. Bush Sr., or George H.W. Bush, this guy was willing to kill his son in midair as George Bush Jr. was scared shitless in the sky for over 6 hours, not trusting even the military jet escort that they had for Air Force One. George Bush Jr. was scared shitless. And this man right here, this evil son of a bitch, would have sacrificed his own son to be able to continue this war of civilizations. Lest we forget, folks, okay, that George Bush Jr. was the governor of Texas. And during his campaign as the governor of Texas, he did not act like the stupid moron he ended up acting like post 9/11. And if you want my opinion, the reason that George Bush Jr. acted like a moron post 9/11 was because he wanted plausible deniability, in my personal view. All right? Now, I want to remind everybody that George Bush Jr. did not one time use his father to campaign for him as president. During the 1999-2000 primaries and the election, George Bush Sr. was nowhere to be found. And as a matter of fact, George Bush Jr. campaigned his presidential campaign on not nation building, not going to war. He campaigned himself as a compassionate conservative. The whole 9 yards, and not once used his father, because let's be honest, his father did not want George Bush Jr. to run. They wanted Jeb Bush. Jeb was the good boy. Lest we forget that George Bush Jr. was drunk until he was 40 years old. And then after 40, he was like, well, I got to take my life serious. He meets Karl Rove, and Karl Rove utilizes his name recognition and advises him on certain policies to get the governorship of Texas. Okay, to get the governorship of Texas. Once he did that, he was going to use his name recognition to win the presidency, which he did. And not one time was he campaigned for with his father. Now, going back to George Bush Sr. being the overlord of what happened on 9/11, I want to show you something that everybody should take a look at. Now, what you're about to see, this was a church, some kind of a of a church kind of get together. It was like a memorial service for 9/11 about a week after 9/11. It was a memorial service at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. Now, I would like to show you all what ends up happening, and I want to show you what Bush Sr. does to Bush Jr. Now, before I even show you this, you all understand Masonic handshakes, right? You understand Masonic handshakes are when you shake the hand of a Mason, and that Mason puts he puts his thumb on a knuckle joint of the person he is shaking hands to. And if it's on the first knuckle joint, they're a Mason that's just beginning. If it's on the second knuckle joint, they're a little bit more of a Mason along the lines of the degrees. And if they are Grandmaster Masons, it's on the third knuckle joint. Now, just take a look at this. And once again, this was the memorial service at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., but a week after the 9/11 attacks.
But our responsibility to history is already clear: to answer these attacks and rid the world of evil. War has been waged against us by stealth and deceit and murder. This nation is peaceful, but fierce when stirred to anger.
He looks scared shitless. Look at him.
And an honesty have no end. Our unity is a kinship of grief and a steadfast resolve to prevail against our enemies. And this unity against terror is now extending across the world. America is a nation full of good fortune, with so much to be grateful for.
Now take a look at this. He is going to get off of the he's going to get off the stage here. Take a look at what happens with him and his father. Take a look at this. Look at the handshake. All around me are familiar faces. Here, do you see that? Do y'all see that right there? I mean, this is not a fucking joke, okay? All right? This is them having a Masonic bond into the agreement that they agreed into. And this is why they didn't even look at each other. They didn't even look at each other, dude. Look at them. They didn't even look at each other. Anyway, folks. And then after this, of course, George Bush Jr. Decided to just act like a imbecile, which he never acted like as he was governor of Texas, all right? I'm not even joking around.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.